A brewmaster lost his son, his wife, and his home in a single night. But what he built from that grief would remake Pandaria. Warcraft Chronicle, The Way of the Monk, the PANDAREN Revolution.
Hey Torin, before we get into today's main story, I have a question for you.
Sure, what's up?
You've played a Torin character for years, right?
Many years. My warrior. Still my main.
So, do you actually know where Torin come from? Like, before Mulgore?
Honestly, I always just assumed Torin were native to Kalimdor. Always been there, always will be there. Why? Is there more to it?
There's a lot more to it, and it connects directly to today's episode. Because Torin weren't always Torin.
What do you mean?
There was one people, originally, the Yongle. Nomadic, bovine, big and strong, living peacefully under the guidance of a demigod called Cenarius, out on the grassy plains of central Kalimdor.
Right, and back then Kalimdor was still one unbroken continent. So what happened to them?
They started sharing hunting grounds with nearby trolls. Tensions built up over time, and eventually they decided to look elsewhere. Headed south, hunting and foraging all the way to the edge of Mogu territory.
Please tell me that went well.
It did not. The Mogu emperor of that era called Chang the Merciless, and I promise you that name was earned, found their strength fascinating. Not in an admiring way, more of a how can I make use of this way. He had his flesh shapers capture the Yongle and reshape them into stronger, more obedient servants.
So they became slaves too?
For generations, until they joined the rebellion we're about to get to. And once the Mogu fell, the Yongle got their freedom back, but not everything else.
What did they lose?
Their history, mostly. Centuries of Mogu law had banned them from even discussing their own heritage. Their oral tradition, the stories that had held their culture together, had almost completely disappeared. And without that shared memory, the Yongle splintered over what to do next.
Splintered how?
Some wanted to hold on to whatever fragments of the old ways remained. Faint memories of a benevolent demigod who'd once looked after them. Others thought tradition was dead weight and wanted to forge a new destiny by force. That disagreement came to a head, and it turned violent.
After everything they just survived.
Most of them wanted nothing more to do with violence. So they left. Some traveled all the way north to the frozen edges of the Storm Peaks. Others settled back in the milder parts of central Kalimdor, specifically to reunite with Cenarius, the demigod who'd guided them long before any of this happened.
So going back to Cenarius wasn't random. It was them trying to reclaim what the Mogu had taken.
Exactly that, and there, close to the Well of Eternity, this group would eventually take on a new name, Torin.
There it is.
Meanwhile, far to the north, near the Forge of Wills, the group that pushed into that frozen terrain adapted completely to the cold. Thick coats sturdy against the wind. They became known as Tonka.
You know, that's what I love about peoples like these. They still have so much of the real animals in them. Huge, shaggy, that calm, solid presence. But they also have cultures and histories of their own. It's genuinely adorable. Probably why I've always been such a Torin fan.
Exactly that feeling. Now, a third group of Yongle never left the Vale at all, and that's where things got complicated. They kept clashing with the Pandaren and the other newly freed peoples, fights over land, over resources, tension that could have turned into an actual war between peoples who'd just fought a revolution side by side.
Wait, they overthrew the Mogu together, and then nearly went to war with each other?
Thankfully, no. Rather than burn that bridge completely, they chose to leave, settled just outside the Serpent's Spine instead, which put them right back in the Mantid's path every 100 years, same as always. Generations of that pressure made them harder, more warlike than their cousins who'd gone north or returned to Cenarius. And they kept the original name, Yongle.
So one people, splitting three ways. One stays near the wall and gets harder for it. One goes back to the old teacher and becomes Torin. And one heads north and becomes the Tonka.
That's the whole family tree in one sentence. Now that we've got the Yongle branches straight, there are two more races we need to introduce before the story moves on, both created by the Mogu, and neither of which we've talked about yet: the Grummels and the Sorok. The Grummels were small, hardy mountain folk shaped from trogs. The Sorok were fierce reptilian warriors created for war.
Did they join the uprising too?
Here's the interesting part. If you go back through the Chronicle's account of this rebellion, the Sorok are conspicuously missing from the list of rebels. Just the Grummels. And there's actually a good explanation for that gap, though it comes from a slightly different source: the Lore Walker artifacts found in-game. That's exactly the kind of extra detail that makes a story like this so much richer.
What's the story?
The Sorok proved too independent and too violent, even for the Mogu to control. They rebelled long before the PANDAREN, entirely on their own. The Mogu responded with the Great Purge, nearly wiping them out. But the survivors fought back, killed the emperor who continued the purge, and vanished into the wilds.
So by the time the PANDAREN's revolution actually happened, they had already fought their own war.
And paid an enormous price for it. The survivors were scattered and independent, which is why the Sorok weren't on the list.
Survival came first, then.
Exactly that. We'll come back to what a lore walker actually is at the very end of today's episode. It matters in its own right. Back to the main story. The revolution that brought down the Mogu Empire wasn't just the PANDAREN. As we now know, the Yongle and the Grummels joined them, along with the Jinyu and Hosen we mentioned earlier. They all came together because one PANDAREN asked a question that changed everything.
Who was that?
His name was Kang. And his story starts the way the most important stories often do, with an ordinary life being destroyed.
Tell me.
Kang was a brewmaster, not a soldier, not a revolutionary, just a PANDAREN who made his living in the usual ways under the Mogu Empire like everyone else. And one day the slave binder, the last Mogu emperor, Lao Fei, came to collect. By any reasonable standard, it was a minor transgression, but under Lao Fei, reasonable standards did not apply. The punishment? Kang's son was sent to the serpent's spine, to die as fodder before the next mantid swarm. And when Kang's wife tried to stop it, she died too.
The whole family. Overnight.
All it took was one visit. And Kang nearly didn't survive it himself. Not from violence, but from despair. He had nothing. He was nothing under this system. And somewhere in the wreckage of that, he started turning one question over and over in his mind. Why? Why does this keep happening to his people?
And what did he conclude?
Something that sounds simple, but wasn't easy to arrive at. The extreme cruelty wasn't the Mogu's strength. It was their weakness. They had become so dependent on their slaves that without them, they had nothing. The whole empire rested on the backs of the people it was crushing.
So their power was proof of their vulnerability.
And once you see it that way, everything changes. Because a weakness can be exploited. Kang devoted the rest of his life to figuring out how, and he started with the most practical problem imaginable. No slave was permitted to touch a weapon, under pain of death.
So he had to work around that.
He taught himself to fight without one. Using his own body, every movement calibrated, every strike precise. And because the Mogu were always watching, he disguised it, made it look like a dance. Flowing, artistic, something even a Mogu guard might watch without understanding what they were seeing.
He hid a fighting style inside a performance.
And when he'd finally mastered it, he challenged his fellow slaves to hit him, and none of them could. They watched this PANDAREN move through them like water and realized, this is something we can learn. Word spread. Hundreds of slaves came to train with him. The way of the monk had begun.
And I'm afraid the Mogu eventually caught on.
Inevitably. Kang gathered his followers and moved them to Kunlai's summit, openly telling them they weren't ready yet. The training wasn't finished. In secret, hidden in the mountain peaks, they built a monastery and kept going.
Kunlai. I remember. That's where Xuan was imprisoned.
Still chained where Lei Shen had left him centuries earlier. Still there. and Kang communed with the white tiger, learning from him the philosophy of inner strength, the idea that power comes from within rather than from domination. He brought that wisdom back to his monks and wove it into their physical training.
So the techniques finally had an inner discipline to go with them.
Exactly. And with that, they were finally ready. The rebellion struck its first major blow at the Mogu Shan vaults, targeting the engine of Nalak Shah, the flesh-shaping machine. The monks drove the Mogu away and seized control of the engine.
They cut off the Mogu's ability to make new soldiers.
They ended the pipeline. That victory made all their preparation visible, and it showed the other races that the Mogu could be beaten. So the Jinyu joined, the Hosen joined, the Grummels, the Yongle, all of them. The rebellion had a shape now.
And I imagine each people had its own strengths to bring to the fight.
The Grummels disrupted Mogu supply lines. They knew every trade route. The Yongle launched raids to the northwest, too fierce and mobile to pin down. The Hosen tunneled into strongholds nobody else could reach. The Jinyu, gifted mystics who could commune with the flowing waters of the land, looked ahead, told Kang's forces where to strike and when to pull back.
A genuinely coordinated coalition.
With the philosophy holding it together, not just desperation. And eventually, Lao Fei's forces collapsed back to their last stronghold, the Veil of Eternal Blossoms itself, the heart of the empire. And Kang knew that if the Mogu held the Veil, they could outlast anything.
So how was Kang going to break their hold on the Veil?
He led the charge personally. Against all odds, he was the one who turned the tide, fought Lao Fe hand to hand, and defeated him.
That should sound like a victory. Why doesn't it?
The wounds Kang took in that fight were mortal. The brewmaster and the slave binder died together.
He brought down the empire and never lived to see his people free.
No, but they were free. The revolution had won, and the empire had fallen. Then came a harder question. What to do with the surviving Mogu? Some of the newly freed wanted vengeance, to do to the Mogu what the Mogu had done to them for centuries.
That's a very understandable impulse.
It is, but it was one of Kang's students who stopped it. A PANDAREN named Song, a keeper of history, someone who had spent years quietly memorizing Kang's philosophies and stories. He went from group to group, retelling everything Kang had believed, justice without revenge, strength without cruelty. And it turned out this wasn't just a moral mission for him. During his travels, Song had noticed something dark lingering in the earth itself, the leftover essence of Yasharaj, scattered across the veil ever since his death, quietly feeding on negative emotion and giving rise to malevolent spirits called Sha.
So there was an actual danger behind all that anger and revenge, not just a moral one.
Exactly. Song believed Kang's philosophy, inner balance, justice without revenge, was vital both to his people's future and to keeping the Sha in check. He knew stories could make those lessons easier to understand and remember. So he spent the rest of his life traveling the former empire, sharing tales people could pass on.
That's a remarkable thing to devote your life to.
And it worked. Others followed in Song's footsteps, and in time, they became known as the lore walkers, storytellers, keepers of history, and mediators. They preserved Pandaria's past through stories, records, and relics, then used its lessons in the present, helping opposing sides see reason and find common ground.
So, the lore walkers we meet in the game, Lore Walker Cho, the Pandaren storyteller who guides us through so much of Pandaria's history, all of that began with song.
It did, and every story they preserve, every lesson they pass on, carries forward the choice Song made, to answer suffering with wisdom rather than revenge.
That's a beautiful lineage.
I think so too. And there's one more piece I want to add before we close, something from outside the Chronicles text, from the game itself. In the Legion expansion, monks can earn an artifact weapon called Shaylun.
What's the connection?
Shaylun was Kang's staff, made from the trees of Kunlai Summit, the ones that survived the worst winters without breaking, blessed by Xuan himself. Kang carried it through every year of the revolution, and after he died, it was returned to the monastery in the mountains.
And the name? Shaylun.
His son's name. the boy who was sent to die before the mantid, the one whose death started all of this.
He named the staff he carried through a revolution after the son he lost at the beginning of it.
That's what it was, in the end. Not merely a weapon, but a vessel for the love he carried with him, even wrapped in grief, still warm, and growing from one son to embrace an entire people.
That's today's episode. We started with bovine family trees, covered a slave revolution, and ended with a staff named after a lost child. Next time, we're back to the trolls, and another very familiar race is about to make its entrance. Something is about to grow up around the Well of Eternity that will change absolutely everything.
You already know who it is. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.
If you're learning English, or if some Warcraft terms felt confusing, tap the video link in the top right. Our vocabulary episode explains useful English expressions from today's story, along with the Warcraft terms we mentioned. See you next time.
See ya.